She had the most loving family and the brightest future ahead, until the man she trusted the most walked out on her and their children. You won't believe what he did when he finally came back. Imagine raising your children alone, struggling to put food on the table, while the person who should have been by your side vanishes without a word. That's exactly what happened to Naledi. What started as a husband's promise to return with a better life turned into years of silence and struggle, leaving her to fight alone. But in a twist no one saw coming, Naledi rises from the ashes and builds a life of success and independence. Just as she and her children begin to heal, Thabo, the man who abandoned them, reappears, drawn by rumors of her success. How would you react if someone who left you at your lowest tried to return when you were finally thriving? This story will teach you about resilience, forgiveness, why trust must be earned. Watch the full video to see how Naledi and her children face Thabo's return and whether they can rebuild what was broken. Please, if this is your first time on our channel, take a moment to subscribe as we dive into this captivating story. The light of the kerosene lamp flickered against the cracked walls of Naledi's small home in a remote South African village. Outside, the sound of crickets filled the air, but inside, the house was heavy with tension. Thabo paced the small room, his footsteps echoing loudly against the silence. "I can't do this anymore, Naledi," he finally said, his voice low but firm. He avoided her gaze, focusing instead on the scuffed toes of his shoes. Naledi, seated on the edge of their wooden bed, clutched her youngest child to her chest. Her face was a mix of exhaustion and disbelief. "What do you mean, Thabo? You can't just walk away." Thabo sighed and ran his hand through his unkempt hair. "This village, this life, there's no future here. I can't keep living like this, scraping by, day after day." Naledi stood, her movements slow but deliberate. "So you leave? You leave me? You leave your children?" Her voice cracked with emotion. But she held her ground. "I'll send money," Thabo said quickly, as if that would soften the blow. "When I find work in Johannesburg, I'll send money back. It's the only way." "You can't make promises like that," Naledi said, her voice rising. "What happens when the city swallows you whole? What happens when you forget us?" Thabo's face hardened. "You don't understand. A man needs to provide. I can't do that here." "And what about a father? Don't your children need a father?" Naledi's words cut deep, but Thabo turned away, grabbing the small bag he had packed earlier. "I'll come back when I've made something of myself," he said over his shoulder, walking out the door. Naledi stood frozen as the sound of his footsteps faded into the night. The baby in her arms began to cry, and soon the other two children stirred awake, their small voices calling for their father. Naledi sank to the floor, tears streaming down her face. But as the night wore on, her despair turned to determination. If Thabo thought he could abandon them and leave her to fend for herself, he was wrong. She would not only survive, she would thrive. The morning sun spilled through the cracks in the wooden shutters, bathing the small room in light. Naledi wiped the sleep from her eyes and surveyed the tiny house. It was quiet now, her children still asleep on the thin mats in the corner. She noticed the torn shirt her eldest son, Fo, had worn the day before. A sudden memory of her grandmother teaching her to sew came flooding back. Naledi rummaged through an old chest, pulling out a needle and a spool of thread. By the time the children woke up, Mfo's shirt was neatly mended. He smiled when she handed it to him, the small gesture bringing a glimmer of hope to the otherwise grim morning. Later that day, Naledi ventured into the village market, carrying a bundle of fabric she had salvaged from old clothes. She approached Mathandi, a kind neighbor who often helped her with food. "You're looking determined today," Mathandi said, raising an eyebrow. "I have an idea," Naledi replied. "Do you know anyone who needs clothes mended? I could do it for a small fee." Mathandi's eyes lit up. "Actually, the school is always looking for someone to sew uniforms. The children tear them up faster than you can imagine." That afternoon, Naledi met with the headmistress of the local school, presenting a carefully sewn patch she had added to one of Mfo's old shirts as a sample of her work. "These are sturdy stitches," the headmistress said, nodding in approval. "I can give you a trial order, 10 uniforms. If they're good, we'll talk about more." Naledi's heart leapt. She spent the next week sewing by candlelight, her hands blistered but her spirit unbroken. When she delivered the uniforms, the headmistress handed her a small envelope of money, the first payment Naledi had earned in years. Back at home, she placed the envelope on the table, gathering her children around her. "This," she said, "is the start of something big. We're going to make it." The children looked at her with wide eyes, their faith in her unwavering. And for the first time since Thabo had left, Naledi allowed herself to believe it too. The sewing machine whirred softly in the dim light of Naledi's living room. It was late, and her children were fast asleep, their small faces peaceful for the first time in weeks. Naledi's hands moved deftly, her fingers guiding the fabric through the machine as though they had been born to sew. The uniforms for the school were almost finished, and she felt a swell of pride as she inspected each piece. The seams were straight, the stitches strong. These were not just clothes. They were her first step toward independence. But the journey was not without its challenges. The villagers whispered behind her back. "She thinks she can sew her way out of poverty," one woman said as Naledi passed the market. "She's wasting her time," another added, shaking her head. Naledi kept her head high, refusing to let their words cut into her resolve. Instead, she focused on her children, who had begun to look at her with a new sense of admiration. Mfo, her eldest, would often sit beside her as she worked, his small hands attempting to mimic her movements. "Will you teach me, Mama?" he asked one evening, his voice filled with curiosity. Naledi smiled and ruffled his hair. "One day, my boy. But for now, your job is to study and become the man this family needs." Mfo nodded, his chest swelling with pride at her words. As the weeks turned into months, Naledi's reputation grew. Parents from the school began approaching her with personal requests, hemming dresses, sewing buttons, and altering suits. With each satisfied customer, her confidence blossomed. Soon, she saved enough money to buy better fabric and upgrade her small sewing machine. One afternoon, Mathandi visited, carrying a bundle of bright, colorful fabrics. "These were leftovers from my niece's wedding," she explained. "I thought you might make something beautiful out of them." Naledi ran her hands over the fabric, her mind already brimming with ideas. She decided to make traditional dresses, incorporating vibrant South African patterns and designs. When she showcased her creations at the market, they sold out within hours. The villagers who once whispered about her now lined up to purchase her clothes. They praised her skills, their earlier doubts replaced with admiration. But for Naledi, the true reward was the smile on her children's faces when she came home each evening, her arms filled with food and the promise of a brighter future. Still, in the quiet moments when the house was dark and her hands ached from hours of work, she thought of Thabo. His absence was a wound that had not yet healed. But she reminded herself of the promise she made the night he left. She would not just survive, she would thrive. The sound of laughter filled the small house as Naledi's children crowded around her. She had just finished stitching a bright, vibrant dress adorned with intricate patterns. Dara, her youngest, twirled in delight, the hem of the dress flaring as she spun around. "Mama, it's beautiful!" Dara exclaimed, her eyes wide with admiration. Naledi chuckled softly. "It's for a customer, my love, but maybe one day I'll make one just for you." The business was growing faster than Naledi had anticipated. Word had spread beyond the village, and customers were now traveling from neighboring towns to commission her work. With every new order, Naledi's name gained respect, and her confidence grew. But with success came new challenges. Managing her growing workload became overwhelming, and her evenings stretched late into the night. One evening, as she sat stitching by the flickering light of her kerosene lamp, Mfo placed a hand on her shoulder. "Mama, you can't do this all on your own," he said firmly. Naledi looked up, exhaustion etched across her face. "I have no choice, Mfo. This is the only way we can keep going." Mfo shook his head. "No, Mama, you need help. Let's hire someone." Naledi hesitated. The idea of hiring someone felt risky, but deep down she knew Mfo was right. After a long pause she nodded. "You're a wise boy, Mfo. Let's find someone." The next day, Naledi approached Ntombi, a young woman from the village who had always admired her work. Ntombi was eager to learn and quickly became an indispensable part of Naledi's business. With Ntombi's help, Naledi was able to take on even more orders and her business flourished. One day, as she stood in the bustling market, showcasing her latest designs, A well-dressed woman approached her stall. She introduced herself as Mrs. Zanelle, a fashion boutique owner from the city. "I've heard about your work," Mrs. Zanelle said, her eyes scanning the neatly stitched garments. "I'd like to place a large order for my shop." Nalady's heart raced. This was the opportunity she had been dreaming of, a chance to expand her business beyond the village. She agreed, and within weeks her designs were being displayed in one of the most popular boutiques in the city. Despite her growing success, Naledi remained grounded. She continued to sew late into the night, pouring her heart and soul into every garment. But deep inside, a storm brewed. She couldn't help but think of Thabo and wonder if he had heard of her achievements. Did he regret leaving? Would he dare to come back? For now, though, Naledi pushed those thoughts aside. Her focus was on her children and the life she was building for them, a life of strength, independence, and resilience. Delivered industrial sewing machine hummed in another. Ntombi was busy cutting patterns at the table, and Memfo was packing finished orders into neat parcels. For the first time in years, the house felt alive, not just with work but with hope. Naledi looked around, a smile tugging at the corners of her lips. "We've come a long way," she said quietly, more to herself than anyone else. "Mama," Memfo called, pulling her from her thoughts. "A man was asking about you in the market." Naledi froze, her hands tightening around the fabric she held. "A man? What kind of man?" Memfo shrugged, trying to appear indifferent, but his furrowed brow betrayed his concern. "I don't know. He was tall, a bit thin, and looked like he hadn't had a good meal in a while. He asked if you were still living here." Naledi's chest tightened. A wave of memories crashed over her. Thabo's departure, his promises to send money, the nights she cried herself to sleep. Could it be him? "Did he say his name?" she asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Memfo shook his head. "No, Mama, but he looked familiar, like someone from the past." Naledi took a deep breath, forcing herself to remain calm. "If he comes back, don't talk to him. We have work to do, and nothing will distract us from that." Memfo nodded, but his gaze lingered on his mother's face. "Are you okay, Mama?" "I'm fine," she replied, her voice steadier now. "Let's focus on finishing these orders. Mrs. Zanella is expecting them by the weekend." But even as she returned to her sewing, Naledi couldn't shake the uneasy feeling. Could Thabo really be back? And if he was, what did he want? Later that evening, Naledi sat outside her house, the cool night air brushing against her skin. The stars above seemed unusually bright, but they offered little comfort. Her mind raced with possibilities. If Thabo had returned, what would she say to him? Would she welcome him back for the sake of the children, or would she confront him for the years of pain and struggle? Her thoughts were interrupted by a soft knock at the gate. Her heart leapt into her throat. She stood, her hands trembling, and walked slowly toward the sound. When she opened the gate, a man stood there, his face partially hidden in the shadows. "Naledi," the man said, his voice rough but unmistakable. It was Thabo. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Naledi's emotions warred within her, anger, sadness, and a flicker of something she couldn't quite name. "What are you doing here?" she finally asked, her voice cold. Thabo shifted uncomfortably. "I heard about your success, about the children. I thought it was time to come home." Naledi let out a bitter laugh. "Home? You left us, Thabo. You left me to raise our children alone. You think you can just walk back in after all these years?" "I made a mistake," he said, his voice cracking. "I was young and foolish, but I want to make things right." Naledi stared at him, her jaw tightening. "It's too late for that, Thabo. We don't need you anymore." She stepped back and closed the gate, leaving Thabo standing in the dark. Inside, her children were her light, her reason for moving forward. She had built a life without him, and she wasn't about to let him ruin it now. The days after Thabo's return were a whirlwind of conflicting emotions for Naledi. Though she had dismissed him that night at the gate, his presence lingered like a storm cloud on the horizon. She could feel it in the stares of the villagers as she walked through the market, hear it in their hushed whispers as she passed. "He's back," one woman said. "Do you think she'll take him in?" another murmured. Naledi clenched her jaw and kept walking, her head held high. She had endured worse than gossip, but the questions gnawed at her. Why had Thabo returned, and what did he truly want? That evening, as she worked late into the night, there was another knock at the gate. This time, it was Mfo who answered. Naledi heard his voice rise in anger before she put down her sewing and stepped outside. Thabo stood just beyond the gate, his shoulders hunched and his face hollow from years of hardship. Mfo, go inside, Naledi said firmly, placing a hand on her son's shoulder. But Mama, go, she repeated. Her tone left no room for argument. Mfo shot Thabo a glare before retreating into the house. Naledi faced her estranged husband, her arms crossed. What do you want, Thabo? I thought I made myself clear. Thabo's eyes were downcast, but his voice was steady. I wanted to see the children. I know I don't deserve it, but I need to try. Please. Naledi's heart wavered. Despite everything, she knew her children had questions she couldn't answer. They're better off without you, she said, though her voice lacked the venom she intended. Please, Naledi, Thabo pleaded. Just one chance. Let me explain. Naledi hesitated, the weight of the decision pressing down on her. Finally, she stepped aside and opened the gate. You have 5 minutes. Inside the house, Mfo and his siblings sat in a tense silence. When Thabo entered, his eyes softened as he took in the sight of his children. They had grown so much, and he barely recognized them. Mfo, he began, but the boy cut him off. Don't say my name like you know me, Mfo said, his voice trembling with restrained anger. You left us, remember? You don't get to waltz back in and pretend you care. Thabo flinched but didn't argue. Instead, he turned to Naledi. I don't expect forgiveness, but I want to be part of their lives again. Naledi's gaze was hard, but her heart was conflicted. You had years to be a part of their lives, Thabo. Years, and we didn't see or hear from you. I was ashamed, Thabo admitted. I failed in Johannesburg. I had nothing to offer you, and I didn't know how to face you. Yet you show up now when we don't need you anymore, Naledi shot back. Thabo's shoulders sagged. I know I'm late, but I'm here now. Please, Naledi, don't punish the children for my mistakes. Naledi's eyes flicked to Mfo, who was glaring at his father, and then to the younger children, who sat quietly, their faces unreadable. The room was heavy with unspoken words, and Naledi realized that this was no longer just her decision. We'll talk about this tomorrow, she said finally. For now, you need to leave. Thabo nodded, his expression one of quiet defeat. As he stepped outside, Naledi closed the door behind him, her mind racing. She didn't know if letting him back into their lives was the right choice, but she knew one thing for certain: their family would never be the same. The next morning, Naledi gathered her children around the dining table. The sunlight streaming through the window cast a warm glow, but the atmosphere was anything but calm. Mfo sat with his arms crossed, his jaw clenched, while Dara and Sifo, the younger two, fidgeted nervously. We need to talk, Naledi began, her voice steady but laced with tension. Your father wants to be a part of your lives again. Mfo's reaction was immediate. And you're actually considering it? He snapped, his voice rising. After everything he's done, or hasn't done. Mfo, Naledi said gently, this isn't just about me. It's about all of us. I need to know how you feel. Dara, the youngest, hesitated before speaking. Mama, I don't really remember him, but if he's sorry, shouldn't we give him a chance? Mfo scoffed. He's not sorry. He's desperate. There's a difference. Sifo, the quiet middle child, finally spoke up. I just want to know why he left us, why he never came back. He owes us answers. Naledi nodded, her heart aching at the pain and confusion in her children's voices. She turned to Mfo. I understand how you feel, Mfo. You've had to grow up faster than you should have because of what he did, but you're also strong and your siblings look up to you. I need you to help me guide them through this. Mfo's expression softened slightly, but his eyes remained hard. Fine, he muttered. But I'm not forgiving him, and I'm not calling him my father. Later that afternoon, Naledi invited Thabo back to the house. The children sat on the couch, their faces a mixture of curiosity and resentment. Thabo entered cautiously, his gaze darting between them. I know I don't deserve this, he began, his voice trembling. But I'm here to answer your questions, and if you'll let me, to make amends. Sifo spoke first, his tone sharp but steady. Why did you leave us? Did you ever think about us at all? Thabo's shoulders slumped. I thought about you every day, but I was a coward. I left because I felt like I had nothing to give you, and the longer I stayed away, the harder it was to come back. That's not an excuse, Mfo said coldly. We needed you. Mama needed you, and you abandoned us. Thabo's eyes filled with tears. You're right, I did, and I'll regret it for the rest of my life, but I want to make things right. Please, just give me a chance. The room fell silent as the children absorbed his words. Naledi watched them closely, her heart breaking for the pain they carried. She knew this wasn't a decision that could be made in one day. It would take time, effort, and patience to heal the wounds Thabo had left behind. I'll let you spend some time with them, Naledi said finally. But on my terms. If you hurt them again, Thabo, there won't be a second chance. Thabo nodded, his face etched with both gratitude and guilt. Thank you, Naledi. I'll do whatever it takes. The following days were tense in Naledi's household. Thabo began visiting daily, his presence stirring emotions that had been buried for years. At first, the children kept their distance. Dara was the most curious, often watching him from a corner of the room, while Sifo remained quiet but observant. Mfo, however, refused to engage. One evening, Thabo arrived with a small box in his hands. I brought something, he said hesitantly as he sat at the dining table with the children. What is it? Dara asked, her curiosity getting the better of her. Thabo opened the box to reveal a set of hand-carved wooden toys. I made these, he explained. In Johannesburg, when things got tough, carving helped me clear my mind. I thought you might like them. Dara's eyes lit up as she picked up a small wooden giraffe, running her fingers over its smooth surface. It's beautiful, she said softly. Sifo examined a carved lion but remained silent, while Mfo crossed his arms and glared. You think some toys make up for the years you were gone? He asked coldly. Thabo sighed, his face filled with regret. No, Mfo, I know they don't. But I want to show you that I've changed, even if it takes the rest of my life. Naledi, who had been watching from the kitchen, felt a pang of sympathy. She knew Thabo's actions couldn't erase the pain he had caused, but his efforts seemed genuine. As the days went by, Thabo began helping Naledi with small tasks around the house, and even assisting with her sewing business. He often worked in silence, trying to earn back the trust he had lost. One afternoon he approached Mfo, who was fixing a broken stool in the yard. Mfo, Thabo said, his voice low, can we talk? Mfo didn't look up. What's there to talk about? About how I failed you, Thabo replied. I know I can't change the past, but I want to be here for you now. Mfo finally met his father's gaze, his expression conflicted. You can't just walk back into our lives and expect things to be okay. I don't expect that, Thabo said quietly. I just want a chance to prove I'm not the same man who left. Mfo didn't respond, but for the first time he didn't walk away. It was a small step, but it was progress. The rhythm of life in Naledi's household shifted with Thabo's steady presence. While the children remained cautious, there were small signs of change. Sifo, who had always been the quiet observer, began asking Thabo questions about his life in Johannesburg, questions that carried a mix of curiosity and resentment. Was it worth it? Sifo asked one evening, as the two sat outside under the stars. Thabo hesitated, his hands fidgeting with a small piece of wood he had been carving. No, he admitted, his voice heavy. I thought leaving would give me a chance to provide a better life for all of you, but I ended up losing the most important things, my family. Sifo nodded, but didn't reply. He seemed lost in thought, as if trying to reconcile the image of the father he barely remembered with the man now sitting beside him. Meanwhile, Mfo remained distant. He threw himself into helping with Naledi's sewing business, often avoiding Thabo altogether. But one day, as Naledi worked late into the evening, the sewing machine suddenly stopped. Mfo, Naledi called, exasperated. Can you check the machine? It's jammed again. Before Mfo could respond, Thabo stepped forward. I can take a look, he offered. Mfo shot him a sharp look. We don't need your help. Naledi sighed and placed a gentle hand on her son's shoulder. Mfo, let him try, it's just a machine. Reluctantly, Mfo stepped aside, watching as Thabo carefully examined the machine. Within minutes it was running smoothly again. Looks like the thread was tangled, Thabo said, stepping back. Mfo muttered a grudging, thanks, before returning to his work. It was a small moment, but Naledi noticed it, a crack in Mfo's walls, no matter how slight. Later that week, Thabo asked Naledi if he could spend more time with the children. I want to get to know them again, he said earnestly. Naledi studied him for a long moment. Thabo, this isn't just about what you want. The children are still healing. They'll decide when they're ready to let you in. I understand, Thabo replied, but I'm not giving up. Naledi couldn't deny the sincerity in his voice. Though her heart still carried scars from his abandonment, she began to see glimpses of the man she had once loved, the man she had thought was gone forever. That weekend, Thabo suggested a family outing. He proposed visiting the nearby river, a place they had once gone to as a family before he left. At first, Mumfo refused, but Sifo and Dara's excitement eventually swayed him. At the river, laughter echoed as Dara splashed in the water and Sifo skipped stones across the surface. Even Mumfo, despite his resistance, couldn't help but smile when Thabo tripped and fell into the water, emerging soaked but laughing. For the first time in years, Naledi saw her family laughing together, and it filled her with a mixture of hope and caution. She knew the journey to healing was far from over, but in that moment, it felt like they were finally moving forward. The air was crisp and fresh as the family walked back from the river, their laughter still lingering like an echo. Mufo walked slightly behind the others, his hands in his pockets and his face contemplative. Naledi noticed his silence, but decided not to push him. She knew Mufo carried the heaviest burden of their shared pain, and healing wouldn't come easily for him. As they reached the house, Dara ran ahead, her energy boundless. Sifo followed, but Mufo lingered outside, standing near the small vegetable garden Naledi had started years ago. Thabo approached him cautiously, keeping his distance. "Mfo," Thabo began softly, "I know I've let you down more than anyone else." Mfo didn't respond immediately. Instead, he crouched to pull a weed from the soil. "You think one trip to the river erases everything?" he asked, his voice sharp but quieter than before. "No," Thabo replied firmly. "It doesn't. Nothing will erase what I did. But I'm here now, and I'm trying. I know that's not enough, but it's all I have." Mfo stood and faced his father, his eyes searching Thabo's face for something, perhaps sincerity, perhaps regret. "You left me to be the man of the house when I was just a boy. Do you know how hard that was?" Thabo's voice broke as he replied, "I can only imagine, and I'm so sorry, Mfo, I failed you, but I see the man you've become, and I'm proud of you." For a moment, the two stood in silence. Then Mfo turned and walked toward the house, pausing briefly at the door. "If you hurt them again," he said without looking back, "I'll never forgive you." Inside, Naledi watched her children settle down, their faces reflecting a mixture of joy and uncertainty. Thabo entered hesitantly, his presence no longer met with outright hostility, but still cautious acceptance. Naledi sat at the dining table, motioning for Thabo to join her. "You've made progress," she said quietly, her voice steady but guarded. Thabo nodded, his hands clasped tightly on the table. "I know it will take time, but I'll keep working for their trust, and yours." Naledi met his gaze, her expression unreadable. "Thabo, this family has learned to live without you. If you're going to stay, you need to understand that we don't need you. We choose to let you back in. Don't make us regret it." "I won't," Thabo promised. That evening, as the family sat down for dinner, the air felt lighter. For the first time in years, they all sat together at the same table, sharing stories and laughter. It wasn't perfect, but it was a start, a new beginning. Naledi glanced at her children, her heart swelling with pride and love. They had weathered the storm together, and though the scars remained, they had proven their strength. As she looked at Thabo, she saw not the man who had abandoned them, but someone who was trying to make amends. Whether he would succeed was yet to be seen, but for now, they were moving forward, together. And that was enough. This story teaches us that forgiveness is not easy, but it is a powerful tool for healing and moving forward. While Naledi and her children endured immense pain and betrayal, their resilience allowed them to grow stronger as individuals and as a family. It shows that even when someone has hurt us deeply, they can still change if they are willing to take responsibility for their actions and put in the effort to make things right. The story also reminds us that trust, once broken, cannot be rebuilt overnight. Thabo's journey of redemption illustrates that true change requires time, consistency, and sincerity. For families who face similar challenges, the story highlights the importance of communication, understanding, and allowing space for emotions to be expressed without judgment. Lastly, it emphasizes the strength of single mothers and their ability to persevere despite overwhelming odds. Naledi's determination to provide a better life for her children is an inspiration to anyone who feels like giving up. Thank you for watching this video. We hope it touched your heart and left you with valuable lessons about family, forgiveness, and resilience. Please don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to our channel for more inspiring stories like this.